With me today on the show is Benedicia. You've been a guest frequently, but every time has been wonderful because I've always learned so much by hearing about the different things you've studied. I was at your house the other day, though, glancing over different books you've collected in your library. And there was one that I thought had a particularly intriguing title. And I remember seeing it somewhere before and thinking, I should read that. But I've never gotten around to doing so just yet. But it was a book called When God Was a Woman.
Oh, yes, Merlin Stone.
And I think I mentioned it briefly the other day, and you were suggesting that really, when you look at the history of humanity, you have to go back, what did you say, 20 to 30,000 years?
Oh, at
instead
least.
of the, say, 4 to 5,000 that the Judeo-Christian era in which we can currently live. I say that not in disrespect to other religions that have not ceased to exist, but just that this seems to have been the prevailing religion of the time, I guess, that we're living in.
It is for now.
But because it is for now, it seems to have affected the way we rate our calendars.
Well, sure, but
there was something before.
Yes.
And that's what we're here to discuss.
Yes, and it's the worship of the deity in the form of the goddess, and that is the oldest religion in the world. And there are still places in the world that it is an unbroken worship since these ancient times. It is not something that somebody invented because they weren't happy with the way the world's religions are running today. This is the oldest religion in the world. So
which you were offering an explanation the other day that I thought made a lot of sense on that, as to why, from the dawn of mankind, shall we say, or dawn of humanity, that the first concepts of a higher power probably were not gender specific, but then they quickly evolved to feminine because of the basic miracle of birth.
yes, because if you look at the way people evolved, it was a rough existence. It was, I hate to say primitive, because they had ways of dealing with things that for their time and place were as complex as the way we deal with our world. That's not the issue. The issue is when people became self-aware, and nobody knows whether that was one of those things where a baby was born and it grew up self-aware as the first self-aware human, or whether self-awareness was a gradual evolution over many, many generations. But if you become self-aware, you also start looking at the world around you and trying to determine, if you're self-aware, what else is self-aware, how do things work, how can you make your life coincide with these things. If you work against the way the world around you is running, then you're not going to survive very long. If you look at and understand and pass on the knowledge of the way your world works, then not only will you survive, but your children will start out with a better chance of surviving. So you are going to be a close observer of the world around you. And one of those things that you are going to observe is, where do babies come from? This is an absolutely amazing thing, even for our own world. I mean, they still talk about...
It still hasn't ceased to be somewhat miraculous.
Yes. I mean, they can make all of these explanations, but there is nothing like the arrival of that new life and looking at it in your hands and saying, 1 week ago, this child was not here. Maybe, yes, you can say, well, baby was here, but this is new life. And no matter how many ways you want to explain it, no matter how much you want to go into the chemistry and the genetics and all the rest of it, there is still that added little, who knows what it is, that says, this is a baby, it's not a rock. There is something more to it than that. So if you look at it from the point of view of people who are closely observing the world around them, who don't necessarily know why babies develop, Where do they actually come from? I mean, yes, they can watch it grow, but...
And they wonder what's going on, and you know, is something wrong?
Well, no, they wouldn't know that. They wouldn't say that there was something wrong, because this is something that they would see on a regular basis. So
Okay.
that, as a matter of fact,
typical enough.
perfect little sidestep here. This is a problem that we are having in the 20th century world, is that birth is being seen as an illness. Oh, heavens.
Elaborate.
Talk to any doctor you want to. They will treat birth the same way they treat anything else that puts you in the hospital. You know, suddenly if you're ill, you are also mentally incompetent.
Okay.
Talk to any woman who's ever had a baby.
And as soon as she's pregnant, the doctor starts talking to her husband, or what?
Yes, among other things. Oh my, it's amazing.
I'm sorry, it just, I like to think in terms of common sense, and it just makes sense that when you're talking about a person, if the person is reasonably competent with the English language, you just talk to the person. You know, I go through another channel, but this is common sense. I'm sorry.
Well,
the world doesn't function on that.
There's another discussion in there, but let's get back to the goddess.
Yes.
If you are living in a world where precise observation is absolutely necessary for your survival, one of the things that you are going to see a lot of, and that is absolutely going to impress you, is no matter what else is going on in the world, birth is happening. And it's not just the women of your group who are giving birth. The animals around you are giving birth. The plants outside your doorstep are, a little seed lands in the ground. And maybe you've seen where that seed landed, and my goodness, after the next heavy rain, there's a little plant. And there are certain plants that they will sit on the surface, and you will see them get wet, and you will actually see the root go down and the plant coming up out of this little dry thing that looks like a little piece of sand or something. So new life is the most amazing thing at any time in history. When you start getting into a spiritual life, then the thing that is going to represent that higher power, the deity, whatever it is that you want to call it, the thing that is going to represent it the most, then, is that most miraculous thing that you see, which is the birth of a new child. And therefore, the very first embodiment of a deity is going to be the mother. Whether it's the pregnant woman, which you see a lot of those little figurines that come from that period of time. They look massive because the pregnant woman is the absolute representation of that most wonderful of all miracles. Therefore, the deity is going to be seen as the mother, or the mother-to-be. And then, of course, because she is also the giver of life, it's a very short step that she is also the receiver of life. She is the one to whom you go back when your life has been completed. Okay, and then, so therefore you start getting the two faces of a deity, which is the mother who gives birth and the crone who takes that life back again. And I'm trying to be careful with my phrasing, because in the 20th century, death is evil. Death is bad. It doesn't matter if you are a Christian, death is still seen as a bad thing. Yes, you'll go to heaven afterwards and all that sort of thing if you've lived a good life. But the death itself is something to be absolutely terrified of. It is, and therefore,
I understand
a bad
a lot
thing.
of people have that perception, but I guess I've never agreed with it. But going back to our discussion, then right in the middle of all this comfortable belief about the deity being female, men suddenly discover that they have a part in the process.
Well, not
No?
exactly.
No.
You have to go and look at what is going on over the entire world at the time that you start seeing the worship of the goddess diminishing and the deity developing a male gender. And that is in the areas where civilization were growing the most quickly, advancing the most quickly. You are looking at an area that is very fertile. The weather is very mild. You don't have to worry about whether or not any child is going to survive not only due to illnesses and accidents, but whether or not there's going to be enough food and shelter and clothing and all of the rest of the things. You don't have to worry about that because you're living in an area of wonderful abundance. But that's that part of the world. There was a period of history where the Mediterranean valleys and all of those things right along that area of the world where the weather
Southern
was...
Europe?
Southern Europe, the Mediterranean basin, Northern Africa, especially the western edge of India, that sort of thing. That whole area is seeing a wonderful, mild climate for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. At the same time that they are seeing this lovely temperate climate, far north, we've got an ice age. And it isn't just a matter of it's a little too cold. We are actually talking about sheets of ice actually covering up the necessities of life. So you're talking about a very harsh environment. You're talking about a lifestyle that is very much on the fringes. All it takes is 2 or 3 extra days of cold in a year, and you're going to lose half your tribe. It also is not a settled civilization because that area of the world will not support the kind of settled agricultural dwelling that more southern areas would make themselves available for. So you develop a nomadic culture when you have these many people running around back and forth trying to make a survival off of a very harsh, very limited environment. Then women start needing to be protected, not just from other people in the tribe, but from the environment itself. So you can't have them running around on horseback and doing everything that men do, because if every woman in the child bears every woman in the tribe bears one less child than she's capable of, that may mean the difference between the survival and the destruction of that tribe. So you have to start
women
pampering.
become protected
Right.
because they're a valuable resource.
Right. But once they start becoming protected like that, it's a very short step to making them possessions. And once they become possessions, then their children also become possessions, and pretty soon you have a very split culture where the women may actually still be worshiping the goddess, but who writes the histories that gets passed on? It's the men. And they are worshiping a deity with a male gender who is like themselves. That's where gods always come from.
We tend to remake God in our own image.
We tend to understand God in our own image. And I think one of the universals of a
making
deity.
God in our own image in the sense of making it up here. The way you conceive, the way you put together your understanding and your perception of who God is.
Yeah, but that's why I was saying it's an understanding of God, because it is a universal that there is no culture that claims to understand God. So you can't exactly say make God. You say your understanding of God is based on who you are and where you come from.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
If you grow up in a harsh environment and it feels like all the world is against you, then your deities are going to be harsh and hard to please. If you look at the Norse cultures, look at Odin and Thor and all of these people. They are harsh, they are capricious, they are difficult to appease. And these are the types of gods that these nomads, when the Ice Age forced them south, these are the gods they brought with them. And because...
And that was their understanding of God because of the environment they'd had to live through.
Right. And the fact that they were moving into a more temperate climate, at that point didn't make any difference.
They were already ingrained with the old
Besides, if you come from a place and a time where your resources are very limited, but you have learned that everything you want, if you want it, you go take it. And if you want to keep it, you're going to have to fight about it. If this is what you grow up with, when you move into a temperate environment where everything you want is just laying on the ground for you to pick up practically, you've still got the habit of, oh, I want that, and I want that, and it doesn't matter that the more you pick up. I mean, you can wind up with a pile bigger than you behind you, but the habit of grabbing everything you can get your hands on while it's there to be grabbed is still there. So here are these people who are used to fighting with each other.
This subconscious memory of the time when it wasn't there, and
Sure.
perhaps an ingrained fear that the day will come when it won't be there again.
And if you don't stockpile, you're going to be in trouble. Talk to anybody who's lived through the Great Depression. You will still see many of them with these kinds of habits, even though they know that at this point in their lives it's no longer necessary. But that was such a harsh lesson that a lot of people can't really seem to get over it. So here you are, you're not talking about just a few people who lived through a particular trying time. You're talking about an entire culture that developed from living in that kind of an environment all the time. There's scarce resources, they're always fighting with each other over who gets it. And when they finally all get forced south, and they find all these unwalled cities and all these very friendly people who say, sure, you want it, you take it. And instead of just saying, oh, I'll take that, they also go, and I'll take you too. And pretty soon you wind up with slavery, and you wind up with cities being overrun, and all of a sudden at this period in history, walls start going up around cities. They have to, because they can no longer depend on trade, and, you know, if there was a fight, it would be like, my city will send a warrior, and your city will send a warrior, and whoever wins, that's how the argument will end. And that was as much as it was going to get until these other cultures started moving in. But you don't see a loss of the goddess.
Forgive me for leaving out the middle of this story, though. But since we have limited time, if we could, I'd like us to quickly cover some of the basics of goddess worship.
Okay.
You know, the different steps in theology. You suggested, for example, that there's also a Trinity there.
Yes, because it is, once you start getting into a more deeply developed theology of the goddess, then you start seeing, okay, the mother was obviously first, because it is the most obvious face of the deity. And then the next one is the crone, because of the obvious leap from, if mother gives life, mother can also take life. But a very, with a tendency to be a very loving, your life is over, you can now come home to me, sort of a thing. That makes it obvious that the next step is the mother in potential, which is the maiden.
Or the bride.
The maiden or the bride. And it depends on which culture you go to as to which one they are more likely to look at, because the maiden is the original. The bride is a sort of an add-on from when the patriarchal cultures first started coming in. Because where you have the original goddess worships, what we call marriage, which is an almost strictly patriarchal invention, because men wanted to be able to say, this is my child.
So marriage had a lot more to do with asserting property than it did with agreeing to a relationship.
Sure, because if you look at it from a woman's point of view, how difficult is it to say, that child is mine? You don't have to prove anything,
sort of
because you carried the baby around for a while, and there were all of your friends sitting there when you produced the child, and there is no question that that child is yours. And who else may have been involved in the creation of this child is beside the point as far as you're concerned. Because all that matters is that the line is unbroken from mother to child, mother to child. And
then we get into patriarchal systems and lineages father to son, even though it makes more sense to go mother to child because
Sure.
you couldn't do it any other way.
sure.
You were mentioning, you started to allude to something we said the other day, though, that you start out with maiden, mother, and crone,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's two faces to each one,
At least,
two.
yes.
Quick, brief explanation of what you mean by at least two.
Okay. The maiden is the mother in potential. She is the energy of potential life.
Mm-hmm.
But it is all in potential. And the face of the maiden is the youth, the innocence, the energy, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But she is also on the flip side. She is innocence potentially offended, which is not something you want to mess with.
Mm-hmm.
She is youth potentially cut short. You don't want to deal with that either. So there are at least two faces for every face of the goddess that you see.
What would be the two for the mother?
Stop and think about it. What is the worst thing that any child wants to face? An angry mother. So
Okay.
there's the loving mother who says, let me help you with that, let me teach you how to do this. There is the angry mother who says, this is wrong, this is bad, and you are going to suffer for it.
Hmm.
The crone is who takes back the life when the life is finished with. It is also the angry being who takes that life away when it is not being used in the proper way.
Hmm.
And then, and those are just the basic faces that most goddess
Yeah.
worshippers are aware of, and then you start getting into, for every outward face, for every inward face, there are more facets than that.
Mhm.
So the goddess is actually a tremendously complex and multifaceted vision of the deity.
I think it's often been suggested that God, however you want to define that by gender or whatever, is a person, but I wonder how many people have given a lot of thought to what is encompassed in just being a person. How many facets, how many emotions, how
Sure.
many psychological tangents, how many memories, experiences, potentials, dreams, on and on we go.
Sure. You and I are not the same with each other as we are with the other people in our lives. Just as...
And we're not the same from moment to moment either.
No.
But we're about run out of time here. On any, if you wanted someone to remember a couple main things, I guess. The first thing that stands out to me is the fact that there were so many thousands of years before the time that I was currently taught about. You know, that's interesting. Just, I guess, in bearing in mind that there is a different way of looking at things, what sort of thought would you leave us with, I guess, concerning the goddess?
I suppose one of the things that, especially for those people who feel disenfranchised with the most available religions today, is that it isn't just a matter of resurrecting a religion from thousands of years ago. The goddess religion never died. And if you feel that what happens in your life spiritually does not connect with the most common religions today, go looking. The goddess may not be the one for you, but there is something out there for you.
And there's a whole lot of different ways to look at it. Thanks so much for coming and sharing. I realize this is a topic that we could go on for hours, but
And hours and days and
but
weeks.
this is a half-hour show, unfortunately. But I do thank you for what you have shared. It's
Thank
been very interesting to think of something quite different from what we're used to. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And now may you be blessed with love and peace in the pursuit of your own dreams and in all your dealings with the diversity of humanity around you. Amen.